We're going to be talking about aid sanctions, in particular what that does in terms of maternal and child mortality. This study was funded by CIGH and the Maternal and Child Health Research Initiative. It's a 3-university study that we've been working on for the last 2 years. My colleagues from Stanford, Michelle Berry, Paul Wise, Aaron Ben David, Gary Darmstadt at the University of Washington, Joseph Delman, and a world-class team of econometricians at Drexel University, who are the team that started the Global Sanctions database. Yoto Yotov, Sasha Kurlaka, and the lead econometrician on this study is Sebastian Bradley. So I want to begin today with 2 geopolitically relevant examples. So Sudan. Sudan has more cumulative aid sanctions than any other country in our database. Sudan has been mired in conflict for decades. It was on the US state sponsors of terrorism up until 2019 when Trump took them off. And since 1989, all the way through 2019, they were under aid sanctions. Civil wars have started in 2023, and the US has sent close to $1.4 billion in humanitarian assistance to try to mitigate this catastrophic humanitarian suffering. Another example from our data set is the Palestinian territories. The first intifada was one of the less violent population uprisings against the Israeli occupation. Saudi Arabia did impose aid sanctions. In the US and the EU were providing development assistance to the Palestinian authorities, and in 2006, Hamas staged a bloody military coup, and in response, the US and the EU both imposed aid sanctions, and we all know where we are today. So when you pick up the newspaper, as I have been daily, in each one of the articles, there's an intermingling of what we're speaking about when we're talking about foreign aid. There's military aid, there's development aid, there's humanitarian aid. So it's important that I clarify for you what we're talking about here. So in our study, we're looking at official development assistance and official development assistance for health. And what we found in the 30 years that we studied is that aid sanctions are resulting in nearly a 17% drop in development assistance for health. Now, sanctions in this regard can mean the total prohibition of aid sanctions, or it can mean a restriction. So either you're cutting everything or you're cutting a piece of it. This is actually an image from where I lived for 3 years just after the military coup in Madagascar. And here's how we define aid sanctions in our study. So here's what we're doing in this piece of work. We're interested in what this means in terms of the impact for maternal and child mortality. And in order to do this, we built a data set. This will be published as a public good alongside the publication, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We're rushing to get this out, especially in light of what's happening in the political environment. And this map is 67 low and middle income countries from around the world. Here's how we did it. So in order to figure this out, we had to merge a lot of different data sets because, as I shared at the beginning, the countries that these aid sanctions are being imposed on are very complex places, right? And it's not only aid sanctions that they're being imposed, there's financial sanctions, there's military sanctions, there's economic sanctions. They're often in the middle of war, right? So we have battle-related deaths, that solid database. We have regime change. We have to figure out whether or not these bloody military coups, all that's going on in terms of the loss of democracy and so forth, how that's playing into all of this. Built a novel data set. And one of the things that came up with our keynote is just the importance of making sure that the work that we're doing is advancing other scholars' work. So a gold standard now is that there are replication packages, and then we're going to be publishing our replication package for other scholars to be able to take what we've done and parse out what's happening in terms of geopolitics and global health. So other teams can build upon what we've done in different ways. The models that we built, the robustness analysis, the sensitivity analysis can all be used in different ways, and other teams can build upon what we've done. I love when people show math. That's a lot wrong. Pretty good, yeah. So broadly, we're looking at deaths per 100,000, and we're interested in aid sanctions, and then everything after that is everything that we control for. So, the conflict, the battle-related deaths, we're controlling for regime change, we're controlling for GDP, we're controlling for what's already happening in that country in terms of death. As our posters in the back are showing, there's already mortality rates that are going on in these countries. So just what's happening in terms of aid sanctions. So this is an advanced study. We're only looking at countries who's have had aid sanctions for longer than 5 years. That's the median duration of their study. You see a pre-trend. The pre-trends have cost our team 120 pages in responses to 5 Lancet reviewers and 3 Lancet Global Health reviewers, but they're statistically insignificant. And the most important point here from a policy perspective is the years since aid sanctions along the x-axis here. Time 0 is when we impose aid sanctions. And what we see is it's 4 or 5 years after the imposition of aid sanctions when you see that increase in mortality. So the bottom line, because I am in the Department of Health Policy, is how to translate these findings into a way that policymakers understand. And from a mathematical point of view, we have to calculate the increase in mortality for infant under 5 and maternal relative to what we see in terms of decrease in mortality, and what is the difference. So, the take-home findings are that we're losing approximately 30% in infant under 5 mortality and 60% of the progress in maternal mortality that we would have seen. And my goal as a postdoc, my goal in the Department of Health Policy, my goal with my colleagues here is that this work is written in an incredibly balanced way. We make policy recommendations for any legislative body imposing these measures that it's possible to shorten the duration when you start to see widespread humanitarian suffering. We offer suggestions for how can you confirm that the mechanisms for getting humanitarian aid into these countries are in place before you impose these sanctions. And uniquely, one of the things that this team did was we have a fragility assessment. So we're proposing questions that any government entity who's going to be using these can go through in terms of internally displaced people, in terms of food insecurity, in terms of climatic events, so that this is not layering too many layers of problems onto these entities who are receiving sanctions. So we're going to do this a little bit differently, just so people who are sitting down who don't want to stand up can also ask me questions. So you have the option to come up to the mic, but if you don't want to stand, Amanda, who's the director of CIGH, is also going to enable you to ask questions from your seat. So that if you don't want to stand, you can still ask questions. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anita Gardine. I'm with Global Strategies. My question is, with the current administration and their focus, what is the opportunity for countries that we work in Africa and other places for them to find alternative sourcing, given that it's not likely to come from the current administration? And I'll add that we work extensively in DRC Congo, and with the attack there, that we were blessed to learn this morning that our staff is safe, but there's no water, no electricity, no access, and the hospitals there only for the most severe. What are those folks to do on a path-forward basis?
Yeah, so I'll answer the question. So one of the things that we found in this piece of work is that you mentioned that you're working primarily in the Congo. One of the questions that we were asked a lot, okay, so this measure, aid sanctions and the 90-day pause on all foreign aid. What's to happen, right? Like, can government bodies increase, right, the amount of money that they're putting into their healthcare system? Can it be government funding? Where else can it come from? But it's dropping total health expenditure, and there isn't the government compensating for it. So one of the things that Iran asked me like 2 years ago is that, it's 3 questions, is it going to impact out-of-pocket spending? You know, and I think that in the short term, like, that's the horrible answer to your question, is that I don't think that governments are going to be able to respond quickly enough. I don't know. I mean, Gary worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I don't know how quickly some of these other entities can respond. And I think that it is the people that are going to end up making up that difference, which is an unfortunate answer to your question.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm Pinu, and I'm an undergrad in CS and Econ, and I'm interested to know, so as you mentioned, like, stopping aid is going to be bad for the communities there, but do you think there will ever be like a sustainable sort of source of funding where we don't tie humanitarianism to like political causes?
That's a beautiful question. The best example that I have is the UK government, and the UK government has actually written something regarding the Sahel, and the argumentation is that we have to have longer term strategies for how we're investing in these nations, because as I showed in the first 2 examples, like we're going to be dealing with increased crisis, we are going to be dealing with increased conflict, and our response as an international community cannot be to withdraw and pull out. And I don't say that lightly in terms of what's happening geopolitically. I'm deeply aware of all of that. But I do think that there are nations that are moving towards longer term strategies in these countries.
Hi, my name is Trina. I'm a senior in human biology. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit further how you differentiate between health sanctions and like all other sanctions, and how you're able to control for that when you do these types of analysis.
Yeah, for sure. So I showed you that picture on my definition of aid sanctions, and this question came out of 3 years watching this play out in a country that I love deeply, Madagascar. And so the argument that I made to my colleagues who run the Global Sanctions database, which is all classes of database, all types of sanctions, is that aid sanctions are different in terms of their mechanism of impact on a population than financial sanctions and then economic sanctions. But in order to figure that out, like, we had to build the data set, because how it works in a nation is different. So, for instance, with financial sanctions, I'm sure that you've read about this in terms of Russia. So, like, the idea was impose financial sanctions, remove them from the SWIFT system, impose economic sanctions, impose trade sanctions. But aid sanctions are something different, and they work in countries in different ways. And part of the reason why I'm like profoundly proud of what we did here is because we're parsing out types of geopolitical tools. We're explaining how they work and what they do. So it's, I don't know if did that address your question? Okay, thumbs up. Good job.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Scott. I'm a medical student at Rhode Island College of Medicine. I was interested in the replication packages that you said that you and your team were creating. I imagine that they could be used to study maybe some interventions that could mitigate the harm imposed by aid sanctions. I'd like to hear whether you see it as a future avenue, and how you would like to see your tools be used by other groups in the future.
Yeah, I mean, And that's why I think, so Sebastian Bradley, who's our colleague over at Drexel, he's the one who is doing this as a public good, because that truly is what we're trying to do here. And I think that part of why I'm proud that we were so balanced in this work is because sanctions are a tool that are ideally used, like, the idea is that they're used short of war, and they're ideally used to prevent war, right? And so to your question, like my hope is that other teams can take this and they can apply their econometric modeling using what we've already done, all the data that we've already cleaned, and say, like, how severe does it have to be to stop a war, and run those simulations. And then, like, these tools, like Paul Weiss said to me, like, these tools, the bottom line is these tools cause harm. The other thing is, if we don't use them, harm is done because we go to war. So I do hope that other teams will do that.
Hi, my name is Ru Hao. I'm a public health student at Hopkins. Thank you so much for your presentation. So I'm wondering, in terms of dealing with the sanctions for those like vulnerable countries and populations, what would the role of the civil societies or international health organizations would be as an alternative to help those people? Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the things that's happening on the international stage is the United Nations Human Rights Council has appointed a special rapporteur on unilateral coercive measures. In international law and at the UN, these are not called sanctions. They will scream at you. There's no such thing as sanctions. So unilateral coercive measures. If you go to the UNHCR website and look up they have a list of all the special rapporteurs. The special rapporteur for unilateral coercive measures. And my email's there, so if you forget that, you can email me. You can write to her, and her mandate is to document the negative harm of these sanctions. But the last person who asked the question, my role as a postdoc and my role as an academic is not in that advocacy role. It is to explain how this works, because I want to work in a policy environment. But if you do have civil society groups that want to engage, it's through the UN High Commission for Human Rights.